My name is Linda Prescott, and the last time I felt like I truly belonged in a home was the moment I gave up mine. You might think it started with a loud fight, maybe a slammed door or a cruel outburst. But no, that's not how it went. It started with a whisper. Just for a few weeks, Mom, while the kids get settled. A whisper I should have questioned harder. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. You might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. Now let me tell you about the basement. It was the room I used to store books, extra linens, and the faded memories of the past. The washer and dryer still hummed there, echoing into the night like a ghostly lullaby. It was never meant to be lived in, but that's where I ended up because they said their children needed my room upstairs. Let's rewind. 2 years ago, I moved in with my son Eric and his wife Sharon after my husband died. I sold our home and handed most of the proceeds to Eric for the children, I said, and I meant it. I was tired, grief-heavy, and wanted to be around family. He promised I'd always have a place with them. A room with a window, a role as Nana. At first it was bearable, even sweet. The kids would come down and read with me. Sharon would sometimes bring tea. Eric was busy but polite. But over time the visits stopped. The cups of tea turned into empty mugs I carried back upstairs myself. My room, the one with the sunlight and the bookshelves, became a study corner for their oldest. Then it became a playroom, then a nursery. No one ever asked. One afternoon I returned from a walk and found my bed dismantled, my books boxed up. A folded mattress now lay in the basement. Eric looked at me with practiced sympathy. "It's temporary, Mom," he said. "You still have your space." I stared at the stairs. They hadn't even swept the dust from the basement floor. I moved my things silently, because that's what they counted on, my silence. My generation was raised on restraint. You don't complain. You endure. The first night down there, I could hear them laughing above me. Distant and warm, but never reaching me. The ceiling seemed thinner than the walls. I lay on the mattress and stared at the exposed pipes running overhead. I tried to tell myself it wasn't so bad. At least I was with family. At least I wasn't alone. But the loneliness in a house full of people, that's the cruelest kind. On my birthday, they forgot I was there. The kids came home with cake frosting on their lips. Someone had celebrated, but not with me. I heard Sharon say, "Keep your voice down. She's sleeping downstairs," as if I were a problem to be avoided. I started to write things down. Little things. The date they forgot I was at the table. The day they locked the upstairs bathroom without telling me. The week I had no hot water because the plumber didn't think anyone used that shower. I wanted to believe it was all just chaos, young parents being overwhelmed. But no, there was a moment that changed everything. Eric came downstairs one day and said, "We're thinking of turning the basement into a studio apartment. Maybe you can help cover some costs." I blinked. Help cover costs? I had given them everything. My savings, my home, my freedom. Something in me hardened that day, quietly, like a frost forming under warm soil. I nodded. "Of course," I said. And that night I started planning my exit. I began waking up earlier than usual, before the house stirred, before the sounds of cereal being poured and cartoons echoing down the vents. It gave me a window, a quiet hour to think, to feel without interruption, and to act. I pulled out an old leather-bound notebook I had kept since before my husband Alan passed. It held the passwords to our accounts, the name of the lawyer who handled the sale of our house, and a list of friends, many of whom I hadn't spoken to since we moved. One name jumped out. Helen Ross. We'd been close once. She and I had taught at the same elementary school for over 20 years. Her number was still the same. I dialed it. "Linda." Her voice cracked through the line like an old melody. "Is everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. My throat caught. No one had asked me that in so long. "I'm not sure," I finally said. She invited me for coffee the next day. I told Eric I was going to the pharmacy. At Helen's kitchen table, I told her everything. Not in a bitter way. Just facts. The mattress on the floor. The birthday forgotten. The suggestion that I start paying rent. Her expression didn't change. But her hands, they gripped her mug tightly, knuckles white. "You know," she said slowly, "you don't have to keep pretending this is okay." I looked away. "I'm not pretending. Then why are you still there? Her words hung in the air like incense, sharp and inescapable. I didn't have an answer. Because I hadn't thought of leaving as an option. Not really. Where would I go? I didn't want to be a burden. Again. But Helen reminded me of something I had forgotten. I had value, not as a babysitter, not as a wallet, as a woman, as a human being. That evening, I returned to the basement with a strange new energy. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. I opened my laptop, the one collecting dust under a pile of blankets, logged into my bank account. Balance, $34.20. Of course, I had handed it over. All of it. For the kids. But I also remembered something else. Before Alan died, he opened a private account in my name, just in case he had whispered in bed one night, "This is for your freedom, Linda. Not for emergencies, for escape if you ever need it." At the time I laughed. We were inseparable. What would I need escaping from? I searched for the login, tried combinations of his old passwords, birthdays, favorite songs, and then, there it was. $42, $8.60, I stared at it like I'd found a secret portal. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough for choices. Enough for movement. I didn't tell anyone. I just started writing a list. Find a lawyer. Find a place. Leave with dignity. Quietly. Completely. But life, as always, doesn't wait for your plans to be perfect. Because 3 nights later, I heard Sharon arguing with Eric upstairs. "She's still here, Eric. You said it was temporary. We need that basement finished before summer." I stopped breathing. He replied, "I'm working on it, okay. She just needs a little push." Push. Not a conversation. Not a request. A push. I went to sleep that night on my mattress facing the ceiling. And I smiled. Because they didn't know what was coming. The next morning I rose early. Packed what little I had. Clothes, books, the old photos they hadn't bothered to hang. I even folded the blanket neatly, left it at the foot of the mattress. And I left. No note. No confrontation. Just silence. But I didn't disappear. I went to see Mr. Callahan Allen's old lawyer, and I told him everything. He asked one question. "Do you want to go quietly, or do you want to make sure they never do this to you or anyone again?" And for the first time in years, I chose the second option. Helen let me stay in her guest room while I figured things out. It was small, just a single bed and a window that looked out over her overgrown rose bushes, but it was more beautiful than anything I'd had in years. Because it was mine. No footsteps over my head. No screaming down the hall. Just the quiet hum of dignity returning. "Mr. Callahan moved quickly. He pulled the deed records, scrolled through the bank transfers, and asked if I'd ever signed anything recently that changed the ownership of the house. No, I said. It was always under my and Alan's name. We bought it after he retired from the fire department. But the papers told a different story. The deed had been transferred to Eric, signed digitally with my name." Callahan frowned. "This is forged. Badly." I could barely breathe. "He forged my signature." Callahan nodded. "Looks like it. And he's already initiated a home equity line of credit. He's pulling money from the house." The room spun for a moment. All those years I spent folding laundry clipping coupons, saving Alan's pension, and Eric had turned it into cash with a few keystrokes. My house wasn't just a house. It was memories. It was Alan's voice in the kitchen humming while he stirred soup. It was my garden of tulips. It was the smell of old pine after rain. It was my life. And he sold it, then shoved me into a basement and called it a favor. Callahan looked up. "We can build a case, but it'll be long. Emotional? They'll fight dirty." "I don't care," I whispered. Because something had shifted in me. I was no longer trying to survive. I was ready to be heard. I opened a new bank account that day, moved every dollar from Alan's old fund. Helen helped me find a quiet rental an hour away, a cottage with ivy on the windows and a back porch. I signed the lease with shaking hands. Then I did something I never thought I would. I went to the local community center. There was a bulletin board by the front entrance. Volunteer readers needed for the senior library art classes for Elders Widow Support Group. Tuesdays at 6 p.m. I signed up for all 3. Because for so long I'd been Linda the helpful, Linda the babysitter, Linda the burden. I needed to find Linda the person. But things didn't stay quiet for long. 1 week later, I got a call. Blocked number. My finger hovered, then I answered. Where are you? Eric's voice sharp, angry, and for the first time unsure. You just left. What are the kids supposed to think? I didn't say anything. You think this is mature? Running away. You didn't even leave a note. Do you know how this makes us look? I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead, I asked, why did you forge my name? Silence. Then I don't know what you're talking about. I saw the deed. I saw the signature. I saw the withdrawals. Mom, this is just a misunderstanding. No, I said, my voice steady, steel rising in my throat. This is theft. Don't be dramatic. I hung up. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. Then another. Then a text. You're ruining everything. But I didn't respond. I printed out the messages, handed them to Mr. Callahan. He added them to the file. It would take time, maybe months. But he was confident, especially with the digital evidence. And while he worked, I lived. I painted again. Terribly, but joyfully. I read poetry aloud at the senior center even if my voice trembled. I laughed with Helen on her porch drinking lemonade like we were 16 again. And slowly, piece by piece, the woman I'd buried under guilt, under duty, under silence, began to stand. But the real storm was coming, because when people like Eric feel control slipping, they don't go quietly, and I was ready. It started with the letter, a thick envelope hand-delivered to my rental no-return address. I knew it was from Eric the moment I saw my name scribbled across the front, Mrs. L. Linda Whitlow, written in the impatient, slanted hand I once taught him as a boy. Inside, a cease and desist order. It claimed I was defaming him, that I had no legal right to interfere with his property, that if I continued to pursue baseless legal action, I'd be countersued for emotional damages. There was even a paragraph claiming I had become mentally unstable and was being easily manipulated by others. He included a screenshot of a group chat messages from Jessica and one of his friends mocking me, calling me senile, bitter a squatter who doesn't know when to leave. My hands trembled. I hadn't cried in weeks, but this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. I called Callahan. He read the letter and whistled. They're getting nervous. That's good. Good. I repeated. He nodded. It means they know you have a case. Now they're trying to intimidate you. I took a deep breath. Then let's make sure they regret it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea watching the ivy sway in the wind. A strange calm settled in my chest. For so long, I had accepted disrespect under the banner of motherhood, sacrificed my comfort, my space, my dreams, all in the name of family. And now family had turned into an adversary, what was left of a woman when even her blood turned cold. The next morning, Helen brought over something wrapped in a plastic bag. It was my old recipe journal. She'd snuck it out before I left. I flipped through it, pages worn with grease and love. On one page was a note in Alan's handwriting. You make this house a home. I don't say it enough. I stared at the words until they blurred. Not because I missed him, but because they reminded me I hadn't always been invisible. And I didn't have to stay invisible now. Over the following weeks, I did everything Eric never expected me to do. I filed a formal complaint with the county assessor's office for deed fraud. I sent the bank a notarized affidavit challenging the loan under my forged name. I wrote a statement to the Elder Abuse Division of the state attorney's office. I even sat down with a local journalist Helen knew from church, a quiet woman with fierce eyes, and told her my story on record. I don't want pity, I told her. I want justice. And I want other women to know they don't have to go quietly. The article went live 2 weeks later. The title, Evicted by Blood, How a Grandmother Was Betrayed by Her Own Son. It went viral. The phone started ringing. Reporters, advocates, strangers who had lived through the same thing. One woman wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to finally say no to my daughter." Another said, "They told me I was crazy. Now I know I'm not alone." Even the community center hosted a roundtable about silent elder abuse. They asked me to speak. Me. Linda Whitlow, the woman who had once slept next to a washing machine. Eric called that night. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" I let the silence stretch. "I'm getting my life back," I said. "You're humiliating us." No, I replied calmly. You did that all by yourself. He hung up, and that was when I knew I had him. Because guilt lashes out when cornered. The legal battle was still ahead. But I had something now that Eric couldn't forge, steal, or block. My voice. And I wasn't done using it. When I showed up to court for the preliminary hearing, Eric didn't look me in the eye. He came in with a clean suit and a tight jaw, flanked by a young, smug-looking lawyer who couldn't have been more than 35. Jessica didn't come, maybe afraid of cameras, or perhaps too busy arranging pillows in my old bedroom. I, on the other hand, came with Callahan Helen and something more powerful than any attorney: documentation. The deed transfer Eric submitted months ago was under my name, but the signature didn't match anything I'd ever written. The notary he claimed had witnessed it had already been disbarred for shady activity. Callahan had uncovered that nugget like a hound to scent. Still, the judge didn't rule. Not yet. This was just the first step in injunction hearing. We were seeking to freeze the sale of the house while the larger fraud case proceeded. Afterward, I walked out into the bright sunlight feeling both wrung out and strangely victorious. I was exhausted, but I wasn't small anymore. That evening, Helen made roast chicken and opened a bottle of red wine. We sat on her patio, our feet tucked under blankets, the evening humming with summer crickets. You've always been brave, she said, raising her glass. I've been quiet, I corrected. Not the same thing. But you're not quiet now. I clinked my glass to hers. Later, alone in the guest room, I wrote in my journal, not a recipe, but something else. Bravery doesn't always look like battle. Sometimes it's just the refusal to disappear. 2 days later, I received a letter. It wasn't from Eric or his lawyer. It was from Alan's sister, Martha. We hadn't spoken since Alan's funeral. She'd never approved of our marriage. But the letter was different. She wrote that she'd seen the article, that she hadn't known what Eric had done, that if I ever needed help, my brother would want you to have this, she wrote. Inside the envelope was a copy of an old will Allen's first, dated 5 years before he died. In it, he left the house to me explicitly with a note. Regardless of what we may later decide for Eric, this house belongs to Linda if anything happens to me. My breath caught. This wasn't the most recent will, of course, but it was something, a statement of intent, one that could be used to challenge Eric's claims of full ownership. Callahan was thrilled. We just got leverage, he said, thumbing through the copy. If this leads to a paper trail or even a shred of corroboration, it will shake their whole narrative. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just nodded. Because I wasn't after revenge. I was after dignity. And yet, poetic justice has a way of arriving when you least expect it. Jessica, in a stroke of arrogance, had listed the house on a luxury home tour site. A reporter from the same paper that published my article attended the tour not knowing it was the same house and saw a photo on the wall. A photo of me and Alan taken in the backyard. She recognized me immediately. The next day, she published a follow-up piece. Grandmother's betrayal. Now a home for sale, but who truly owns it? The house became a symbol. A viral conversation. People commented by the thousands. Some remembered their own family betrayals. Others donated to a fund set up for my legal fees. One comment stood out to me. My grandmother raised me after my parents left. I don't know who I'd be without her. This story made me call her today. Thank you. I read that message 3 times, then once more aloud. And that was when I knew, even if I lost the house, I had already won something bigger, a space in the hearts of women who had long been made invisible just like me. It had been weeks since I left Eric's house, my house, and though I no longer cried over the betrayal, I couldn't stop grieving what it represented. Not just the bricks and wood, but the erasure, as if everything I had built had been boxed up and sold without a second thought. But the story wasn't over. The day after the second article dropped, something unexpected happened. The nursing home called. Apparently, Eric had never finished paying the deposit. He had put down the minimum and promised a recurring payment plan, then vanished after moving me in. Now the home was contacting me to collect. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. He used my name on the paperwork, I told Helen, and then ghosted them. She was livid. We have to go public with this too. I already am public, I said. I just didn't expect it to feel so humiliating. Helen wasn't wrong, though. The nursing home administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Teresa, agreed to speak on record. She confirmed that Eric had filed false financial declarations listing me as a dependent with no assets, then stopped responding to their billing department altogether. Callahan added it to the civil complaint. This wasn't just elder abuse. This was orchestrated financial abandonment, and it played well in the media, the narrative of a self-sacrificing grandmother kicked out and discarded now, saddled with debts she never agreed to. The press called it modern-day Dickens. Meanwhile, Eric went silent. No calls, no texts. His lawyer claimed ongoing settlement talks, but we all knew they were stalling. That's when Jessica made her next move. She filed for a renovation permit to add a nursery and home office to the house. In public records, she had written, "To prepare for our future, they weren't just taking over my house, they were scrubbing away my entire presence from it." I imagined them repainting the walls, pulling up the floors Alan and I had installed one summer during a heat wave, and tossing the flower pots I once kept by the kitchen window. Helen found me staring at the newspaper where the renovation was listed. "What if they win?" I whispered. "What if the house becomes there forever?" She didn't offer empty promises. Instead, she said, "Then you burn it into the memory of everyone who's ever been hurt like this. That's how you win, not by keeping the house but by refusing to let the silence bury you." I began writing again. Not recipes, not even journal entries. I wrote the truth. A public letter addressed to Eric, but really for the world. "You asked me once as a boy why Grandma Rose never came to dinner. I told you she had her reasons. Now I understand them. Some betrayals don't scream. They whisper, and they grow in the dark." The piece went viral again. This time, it was shared not just on news sites, but on parenting blogs, financial planning forums, even caregiver subreddits. The story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, the forgotten women who once held families together, now tossed aside when our usefulness had expired. Then quietly, something shifted. Eric's lawyer reached out to Callahan with a proposal. They were open to negotiation. No apology, no admission of guilt. But suddenly open. Callahan smirked when he told me, "They're scared." Jessica's employer saw the story. And let's just say their company's big on image. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I asked for one thing. I want my name off the debt. I want my name back on the deed. And I want to be the one to decide what happens to the house. Callahan nodded. "Then let's make them sweat." The negotiation meetings were cold and impersonal, conducted via video conference through layers of legal intermediaries. Eric never looked directly at the camera. Jessica sat beside him, face tight, arms crossed, as if the world owed her a life without consequences. Callahan opened with a simple phrase. "We're not here to beg. We're here to correct what was stolen." The demands were clear. My name reinstated on the property. The debt incurred under my name at the nursing home forgiven by their repayment. A formal public statement acknowledging wrongful treatment and abuse. Their lawyer balked. "That's not a settlement. That's a public flogging." Callahan responded calmly. "That's accountability." In the background, I watched Eric's face. He looked older than I remembered. Not from stress, but from cowardice. There was a kind of aging that happened when someone betrayed their values and had to live in the wreckage. He couldn't even make eye contact. The same boy who once asked me to read bedtime stories now seemed afraid of my voice. Jessica spoke instead. "Fine. If she wants the house back, she can have it. It's falling apart anyway." That lie struck deep. My house wasn't perfect, but it was loved. Every creaking floorboard had a memory. They agreed to the terms under one condition. I could not sue them for emotional damages. I agreed. I didn't want their money. I wanted my name. 3 weeks later, the final paperwork was signed. Callahan slid the title across the table. My name back on the deed in clean black ink. "You just reclaimed your history," he said. And I had, but something in me hesitated. The house wasn't what it once was. The kitchen felt colder. The garden had withered. Eric and Jessica hadn't just occupied it. They'd emptied it of warmth. I walked through each room like an archaeologist of my own life. In the basement where they'd made me sleep, I found a folded cot still pushed against the water-stained wall. I stood there for a long time. Then I grabbed a box of matches. No, I didn't burn the house down. But I did something worse. I invited a local documentary filmmaker to tell the full story with visuals, interviews, and court documents. It was titled Unmothered: The Cost of Family Silence. It premiered at a small community screening, but within days it was picked up online. Tens of thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands. The comments section became a therapy circle for the betrayed the cast, aside the ones who raised children who no longer recognized their hands. Someone wrote, "She didn't set fire to the house. She set fire to the myth." That comment stayed with me. Soon the calls began again. A woman in Arizona messaged me. Her son had tricked her into signing a reverse mortgage. A retired teacher from Maine said her daughter sold their lake cabin while she was recovering from hip surgery. Story after story, a network of grief. I replied to every message. "You're not alone," I wrote. "And it's not your fault." Then one evening, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from a return address I recognized. My grandson's school. Inside was a folded card with clumsy handwriting. "I miss you, Grandma. Mom said you went on a long trip. Did I do something wrong?" I broke. That night, I cried for the first time in months. Not for the betrayal, but for the small boy trapped in a house that taught him silence. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some wounds had to scar before they could bear witness. But I pinned the note to my kitchen corkboard next to a photo of me and Alan building the porch swing in the rain. A reminder: love does not die when family turns cruel. It just grows quieter. A month after the documentary aired, I received an invitation from a women's advocacy group in Vermont. They were hosting a conference on elder rights, and they wanted me to speak not just as a victim, but as a voice for those who'd been silenced. At first I hesitated. I'd never stood on a stage before. My words had always been used in quiet ways. Lullabies, prayers, recipes whispered in the kitchen. But this was different. This was about reclaiming dignity. So I said yes. The room was modest, filled with folding chairs and aging chandeliers that hummed faintly under the weight of time. But the energy was electric. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. Some leaning on canes. Others holding photo albums, all gathered like survivors of a storm that no one else acknowledged. When I stepped up to the podium, my voice trembled. Then I began. "My name is Eleanor Fielding. I raised my son alone after my husband died. I saved, I cooked, I sacrificed. And in return, I was made to sleep in a basement so that his children could live like royalty in a house I built." There was no microphone, but somehow I didn't need one. They heard me. Afterward, they lined up to hug me. One woman whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." Another pressed a handkerchief into my hand, stitched with the words, "She remembered who she was." That night, I returned to my hotel room and stood in front of the mirror. I saw someone I hadn't recognized in years, not just a woman who'd been wronged, but one who had survived betrayal and turned it into a banner. Back home, things were quieter. No more lawyers, no more battles. But peace was a strange new companion. The silence in the house no longer echoed like loss. It felt like space, a place where I could breathe again. One morning, I opened the door and found a letter tucked between two hydrangea leaves. There was no return address. The handwriting was shaky. Inside a single sentence: "I heard what they did to you. My daughter tried the same." I stood up. "Thank you." It wasn't signed. I didn't need a name. The movement had begun. Meanwhile, Eric had disappeared from public view. Jessica deleted her social media. A few neighborhood acquaintances mentioned seeing them packing boxes. The house they'd bought after selling mine had a foreclosure notice posted on the front door. I didn't rejoice. I didn't curse them either. I simply continued. Sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. Sometimes it's letting the truth sit quietly like a thorn they can't remove. Weeks later, I received a certified letter from a lawyer I didn't recognize. My heart clenched had they filed a countersuit. But no, it was from my grandson's court-appointed guardian. A custody review had been launched. Allegations of neglect, emotional abuse. He would be moved to temporary care. Then a final note. He listed you as the only adult he trusts. I collapsed into my kitchen chair and wept. For joy, for grief, for every bedtime story I thought he'd forgotten. 3 days later, I stood outside the children's center watching the door open slowly. He was taller than I remembered, wearing a backpack that looked too heavy for his thin frame. He saw me. He ran. I opened my arms. No words were needed. That night, he slept in my bed. I took the couch by choice. But he came downstairs hours later, blanket in hand. "Can I be near you?" he asked. "Yes," I said, scooting over. "You're home." We lay there, heartbeats, sinking breath steady. He whispered, "I always knew you didn't leave because you wanted to." I nodded in the dark, and for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep. Not with fear or fury, but with hope. Life with Jamie was quiet but filled with little rituals that stitched us back together. He liked his toast with strawberry jam and no butter. I remembered. He still preferred orange socks. I found them online in bulk. And every evening we sat by the window listening to the same old jazz record I used to hum when rocking him to sleep. But healing wasn't instant. Sometimes he'd flinch when I raised my voice at the TV. Other times he'd say, "Am I in the way?" It shattered me, but I never let it show. Instead, I responded the same way every time. "You are the reason this house is still warm." He started therapy and I went with him. In one session, he asked the counselor, "Why do grown-ups lie to kids?" The therapist paused, then said gently, "Because sometimes adults are still children who never learn to tell the truth." Jamie looked at me. I squeezed his hand. We weren't just rebuilding a relationship. We were rewriting history. One rainy afternoon, Jamie stood at the doorway holding a small stack of papers. "I found this in my dad's office," he said. It was a typed transcript of the deal Eric made with the buyers of my old house. They'd included a clause. Seller acknowledges and accepts full liability for prior residents' mental health status. Eric had declared me mentally unstable to secure the sale quickly and prevent any legal contest. I stared at the line. I couldn't cry anymore. Grief had crystallized into something harder. Justice. With help from a volunteer lawyer at the advocacy group, we prepared a case. Not to reclaim the house, I didn't want it back, but to clear my name, to unstain the word mother, to protect Jamie from the rot passed down like inheritance. Court was quiet. They didn't show up. The judge read the documents and issued a formal nullification of all claims about my mental health. Publicly. Permanently. When I left the courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. That weekend, I visited the old neighborhood. The new owners had painted the house a ghastly shade of blue. The hydrangeas were gone. The porch swing replaced by a set of cheap patio chairs. Jamie sat beside me in the car and whispered, "It looks sad." I nodded. "It doesn't remember us anymore. We didn't get out. We didn't need to." Back home, Jamie asked if he could paint a mural in the hallway. I said yes. He started with a giant tree, its roots wrapping around the door frames. Then came birds. Then a grandmother and boy sitting beneath the branches reading a book. The final detail. A small plaque painted on the bark that read, "She stayed." That night, I made hot cocoa and turned on the porch light. "Why the light?" he asked. "In case someone else out there is lost," I said. "They'll know there's a place still glowing." He leaned against me. "Do you think they'll regret what they did?" I looked at him the way his eyes searched mine, not for answers, but for reassurance. "No," I said gently. "People like that don't regret, but they remember. And remembering can be its own kind of punishment." He didn't speak after that, just sipped his cocoa and rested his head on my shoulder. The porch creaked softly. The mural dried upstairs, and somewhere in the dark, a broken lineage stitched itself whole again, one quiet evening at a time. It had been 6 months since Jamie moved in, and the house had become ours again, though in many ways it had never stopped being mine. The wallpaper still peeled slightly near the kitchen door. The tea kettle still whistled off-key, and the front steps still groaned beneath our weight. But there was something new in the air now, something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I had expected closure to feel like a courtroom victory, a door slamming shut. But instead it was this waking up and finding my slippers exactly where I left them. Jamie humming in the bathroom. The dog next door barking at the mailman like clockwork. Ordinary things restored. Then one day I got a letter, not an email, not a phone call. A physical letter, cream-colored envelope with my name written in tight, slanted cursive. It was from Marissa. I hadn't seen her in over a year, Not since the day I was moved into the nursing home. Her words were measured, almost rehearsed. I heard about the case. I didn't know Eric did that. I hope you're doing okay. Jamie mentioned you were living together. Maybe we could talk sometime. I sat with the letter on my lap for over an hour. Jamie found me there. You okay? I nodded but slowly handed him the letter. He read it twice before setting it on the coffee table. Are you going to write back? I don't know, I said truthfully. Do you want me to? He shrugged, but I saw the tightness in his jaw. She didn't come for you. When it mattered. The next week, Marissa showed up. No warning. She just appeared on the front porch like a ghost from another lifetime. I opened the door and we stared at each other for a long moment. She looked older, thinner, and tired in a way that couldn't be fixed with sleep. Can I come in? She asked softly. I let her in, not because I forgave her, but because I needed to see her face when I asked the questions that haunted me. We sat in the kitchen, the same one she used to sneak snacks from as a teenager. I poured tea. She didn't touch it. Why didn't you stop him? I asked. Marissa's eyes welled up. I was scared. Of losing my home. Of losing him. Of choosing you and regretting it. You chose him, I said, voice firm. I know, she whispered. Do you know what he told Jamie? What he filed to the court? That I was unstable. That I needed supervision. You signed it too. She wiped her eyes. I didn't read the papers. I just trusted. Trusted what? I snapped. That I'd disappear quietly. That I'd never come back. Jamie came downstairs, then pausing when he saw her. She turned to him. Jamie, I'm sorry. He didn't say a word. Just walked past us and out the back door. She stayed for another 5 minutes, then left. I didn't walk her out. Later that night, Jamie came back inside with red eyes and grass in his hair. I don't hate her, he said, almost surprised at himself. But I don't trust her either. You don't have to, I said. Forgiveness isn't a favor. It's a boundary. He looked relieved, like he'd been waiting for permission to let go of something heavy. The next morning, I sat by the window and watched a bird hop across the porch. It was carrying a piece of string building something somewhere. And I realized I was doing the same. Not rebuilding the old house, but stitching together a new kind of home, one built on truth, memory, and a love that had weathered betrayal. I wrote Marissa a reply. Just one line. Jamie is healing. Please don't reopen wounds you helped create. I mailed it and never expected a response. She never sent one. 1 week later, Jamie handed me an envelope. College application, he said. I want to study psychology. I smiled. Because of the therapist. Because I want to understand how people can change, and how some never do. I nodded. You'll be good at it. He grinned. You think so? I know so. That night we stood in the hallway beneath the mural he had painted. He added something new, a small silver key hanging from the tree. What's that for? I asked. For the next person who needs a way out, he said. And just like that, my heart broke and healed again in the same breath. Weeks passed and the seasons turned. Fall crept in quietly like a cat slipping through a cracked door. The leaves outside turned amber and gold, blanketing the porch steps and clinging to Jamie's shoes when he came home from his after-school job. He was different now, steadier, more focused. He still had his occasional flare of teenage defiance, but there was a core of kindness in him that grew stronger each day. He was becoming a man, and I was lucky enough to witness it. One Saturday afternoon, as we were clearing out the attic together, Jamie uncovered an old photo album. Its leather binding was cracked, the pages slightly warped from years of humidity and neglect. He opened it carefully, and there we were. Jamie, no older than 5, with a chocolate-smeared face and his arms around my waist. Marissa and Eric were in some of the photos too, smiling like a family from a catalog. But even then, I remembered how I'd been the one taking Jamie to school, cooking his meals, rocking him when he had night terrors. They didn't want me, Jamie whispered. You raised me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He closed the album slowly and said, Can I keep this? I nodded. Later that evening, we sat on the porch with mugs of cider in hand. The house glowed behind us, warm and golden. I've been thinking, Jamie said, breaking the silence, about what you said about forgiveness. He paused, then turned to face me. I want to confront Eric. I need to. I didn't answer right away. My grip on the mug tightened my pulse a little faster. Are you ready for that? I asked. Because you might not get the closure you want. I'm not doing it for him, Jamie said. I'm doing it for me. So we drove to Eric's new address just outside the city, a sterile suburb with manicured lawns and houses that all looked the same. Jamie asked me to wait in the car. I watched him walk up to the door, taller, now broader in the shoulders, his back straight like a soldier heading into battle. Eric opened the door. His face froze when he saw Jamie. He said something I couldn't hear. Jamie shook his head. His voice was firm, his hand gesturing with finality. Eric stepped forward. Jamie stepped back. And then, without another word, Jamie turned and walked away. He climbed into the car and buckled his seatbelt. Well, I asked. Jamie looked out the window. He didn't apologize, he said. He tried to make excuses. Said, I didn't understand what it's like to be responsible for someone else's life. He turned to me, then his eyes steel. But I do understand. Because you did that for me. Every day. My throat tightened. I reached for his hand and he didn't pull away. I told him, Jamie continued, that I don't hate him. But he doesn't get to be part of my future. And just like that, the last tether was cut. When we got home, the sky had turned lavender. Jamie went inside, but I lingered on the porch watching the stars come out. That night, I dreamt of the basement. Only this time, I wasn't trapped. I was unlocking a door from the inside, walking up the stairs, emerging into light. A week later, we received a certified letter. It was from Eric's lawyer. Apparently, after the judgment, Eric had tried to appeal, but the court upheld the ruling. My name was back on the deed. The house was mine legally, unquestionably. At the bottom of the page, a note. My client wishes to avoid further contact. This concludes all matters. Good. Jamie came home later that day excited. He'd been accepted into the college he wanted, full scholarship. I leave in January, he said. I'm going to miss you. I tried to smile. You'll be back. Holidays. Breaks. Will you be okay here by yourself? I nodded. I've been alone before. But now it's a choice, not a punishment. That night, I opened the window of the room that had once been stripped from me. The breeze smelled like rain and falling leaves, and I felt free. The weeks that followed were quieter than I'd imagined, but not lonely. Jamie had begun preparing for his departure. Boxes stacked in corners. College brochures still clinging to the fridge with magnets shaped like suns and moons. He was buzzing with nervous energy, always flitting between excitement and anxiety, while I found myself slowly settling into the peace I hadn't dared believe I'd ever reclaim. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like mine again, not just in paperwork, but in essence. The walls no longer echoed with footsteps I didn't welcome. The air felt lighter. I started reclaiming little parts of myself, too. I went back to painting, something I hadn't touched since before my back began aching and my spirit began crumbling under their silent punishments. I cleaned out the basement not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I turned that cold, forgotten space into something that resembled an art studio. The same room where they once banished me to sleep became the room where I reclaimed my joy. A fitting irony, really. Each stroke of color I laid down on canvas felt like rewriting a scar. Not hiding it, transforming it. Jamie would often come home and peek in. That's actually really good, he said one day, staring at a landscape I'd been working on. It's the lake from when you were little, I said. You used to toss rocks into it, remember? He smiled. I remember falling in once, and crying like you were drowning. We both laughed. It was strange how memories could stitch you back together when used right. The same memories that once brought pain when looked at through a different lens held tenderness, even the ones that hurt. One morning, I got a phone call. A woman's voice, formal, rehearsed. From a social services office. She said that Marissa, Jamie's mother, had been arrested on drug possession and assault charges. They'd found my number in an old file. They thought you might be willing to provide context for her history, she said. I listened in silence, then said simply, I have no comment. Because I had no rage left for Marissa, no desire to be tangled in her narrative. She left her son once. I picked up the pieces. That chapter had closed. Later that evening, Jamie and I sat at the dining table. The good one. The one I wasn't allowed to sit at when the others were still here. I got a call today, I said. He looked up from his notebook. It was about your mom. His expression didn't shift. Not with anger, not even sadness. What happened? He asked quietly. I told him. He sat still for a while, absorbing it, then nodded. I hope she finds peace, but I don't want to see her. I know, I said. You don't have to. We were both quiet, but it was a peaceful silence, a knowing one. Winter arrived early that year. Snow dusted the hedges outside. I hung small lights on the windows, something I hadn't done since before everything fell apart. It wasn't for anyone else, just for me. On Jamie's last night home before leaving for college, we had cocoa by the fireplace. He gave me a small box. Inside was a key. I made a copy of my dorm key, he said. Just in case. I blinked, caught off guard. In case of what? In case you ever want to visit, or need a place to run away to, though I hope you never do again. I smiled through tears. Thank you. When he left the next morning, the house felt impossibly big, but not in a tragic way, in an expansive way, like a field freshly tilled waiting to bloom. I spent that afternoon painting again, this time a portrait. Not of a person, but of a door half open. And beyond it, golden light. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a note. I'm sorry I made you feel like less than human. I thought I was entitled. I was wrong. You don't have to forgive me, but I wanted you to know. No name, no signature. But the handwriting was Eric's. I folded the paper once and placed it in the drawer beside the stove, where I used to keep his lunch money when he was a boy. It stayed there, unread again, unanswered. Healing isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's the sound of nothing breaking anymore. Sometimes it's standing in your kitchen stirring a pot of soup, humming to yourself. Not because someone's listening, not because you have something to prove, but because the melody returned all on its own. Spring arrived like a breath of forgiveness. Cool mornings, blooming hyacinths in the front yard, and the occasional sound of children laughing down the block. I had stopped expecting apologies from the people who'd wronged me. Instead, I began offering small, quiet forgivenesses to myself. Jamie called every Sunday, sometimes from his dorm, sometimes from a walk around campus. His voice carried the breeze of young beginnings, yet he never failed to ask, "How are you doing, Grandma?" And I always told him the truth. I'm finding pieces of myself again. One afternoon, while tending to my garden, I noticed a car idling in front of the house. I didn't recognize the make. A moment later, a woman stepped out. Thin, nervous, hair pulled back too tight like she was trying to hold her life together strand by strand. It was Charlotte, Eric's wife. I stood still. She looked at me the way a child does when caught sneaking sweets. Not angry, not cruel, just ashamed. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, she began. I thought maybe. She didn't finish. I didn't invite her in. I simply handed her a glass of water and we sat on the porch steps, like neighbors, like people who once shared a roof but not a soul. I didn't know what was happening down there, she said quietly. The basement. I thought you didn't mind. I looked at her. That's the thing about cruelty, Charlotte. It doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it hides in silence. And convenience. She nodded, eyes glassy. I should have asked. I should have seen. But you didn't. No. We let the moment hang. I want to be better, she said finally. Then be better for your children, I replied. Not for me. She stood, brushed her knees. Do you hate me? I used to, I said. Now I hope you never become the kind of woman who ends up like me. The visit left a strange calm in its wake. Closure often doesn't come wrapped in grand revelations. Sometimes it's just the sound of an old door closing with a gentle click. That night, I journaled. I hadn't done that in years. Today I wrote, I realized I am not invisible. I never was. They just refused to look. 2 weeks later, a small envelope arrived from the county office. A letter confirming the completion of the title transfer. The house is now legally, irrevocably mine. I stood in the foyer holding that document like a medal, like a certificate of survival. The house wasn't just shelter. It was proof. I existed. I had endured. And now I remained. I hosted a small dinner the following weekend. My friend Elsie brought wine. Her daughter brought lasagna. Jamie surprised me by arriving a day early, his suitcase still in the Uber. He hugged me so tightly I felt like he was anchoring me to the earth. "You look taller," I said, brushing his curls. "You look stronger?" he replied, and I believed him. As we ate, laughed past plates back and forth, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Same lines on my face, same soft jaw, same streaks of silver in my hair. But the woman in the reflection looked full, not bitter, not empty, not broken, just full. Full of story, full of ache, full of art and garden and light and time. And that night, after everyone had gone, I stood in the middle of the living room and whispered into the silence, "I am not the basement." The next time I saw Eric was not planned. I had just returned from the farmer's market, arms full of fresh flowers and sourdough, when I noticed a figure standing on my porch. It wasn't Jamie he always called ahead, and it certainly wasn't Charlotte. It was Eric. He looked thinner, hair disheveled, shirt wrinkled as if he'd lost more than just weight. There was a tiredness about him that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from running from guilt consequences, or maybe himself. "Mom," he said. I didn't respond, just unlocked the door and stepped past him. He didn't follow. I heard you kept the house," he said to my back. I didn't think. "No, Eric," I interrupted, turning around slowly. "You didn't think. You never did. Not when you took the deed. Not when you blocked my number. Not when you walked me into that home and left me." He lowered his gaze. "I was scared," he murmured. "Of what? Responsibility. Or the reflection you saw when you looked at me, one that reminded you weren't as decent as you pretended to be." He looked away, the silence between us thick with memory and missed chances. "I came to apologize," he said, barely audible. "Then apologize. I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have any of it. I thought I was doing what was best for my family. I was wrong." "You didn't do what was best for your family," I said coldly. "You did what was easiest for you." I didn't invite him inside. I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I handed him a single daffodil from the bouquet I had bought that morning. "Take this," I said. "Plant it. In your yard. Or your guilt. Wherever you still have a patch of honesty left." He took it hesitantly, then turned and left. That night I cried. Not because I missed him, but because I no longer did. It was a different kind of grief, grieving the illusion of a son I once thought I had. The boy who scraped his knees on the sidewalk and cried into my arms had grown into a man who had traded his conscience for convenience. And I had to accept that. The days passed quietly. I returned to painting. I reconnected with women from my church group. I even started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children whose parents worked long hours. Every Tuesday afternoon, Jamie called from campus. We talked about everything and nothing, classes, books, the rising price of coffee. But every call ended the same. "I love you, Grandma. I love you more." He made me believe in second chances. I was sitting by the fireplace one evening when the doorbell rang. Expecting Elsie, I opened it with a smile. It was Eric again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He held Jamie's hand. And Jamie was crying. "She told me what happened," he whispered. "All of it. I didn't know it was that bad." Eric looked at me, eyes wet. "Jamie asked me to come, to make things right. I want to try." I looked at Jamie, then back at Eric, and then I stepped aside. Not out of forgiveness, but because Jamie deserved to witness what redemption might look like if it ever dared to grow. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, Jamie, eyes flickering between us with hopeful uncertainty, and Eric, his hands clasped, knuckles white. The same hands that once signed me away, the same hands now trembling in apology. "Where do we begin?" he asked softly. I studied him, his eyes, his posture, the weight behind his words. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was a man who had seen himself, truly seen himself, and didn't like what stared back. "I don't know if we can begin again," I said. "This isn't a book where the pages reset. What you did wasn't a chapter. It was a fire. I know, and some things can't be rebuilt. Some don't need to be." Jamie squeezed my hand under the table. I felt the warmth of his loyalty like a lifeline. Eric took a deep breath. "I'm not here to erase anything, or to fix what can't be fixed. But I want to take responsibility. I want you to know I've sold my other property." The proceeds? I want to transfer half of it to you. Not as repayment because what I did was beyond money, but as an acknowledgement. You deserve dignity, not scraps. My lips parted slightly more in surprise than relief. I also started therapy, he added, twice a week. And I've told Charlotte I need time away to understand how I let myself become someone who could hurt you like that. For a moment, I let the silence bloom. You know, I said at last it's not the money. It never was. I know, he whispered. That's what makes this even worse. We spent hours at that table sipping lukewarm tea, cracking the surface of things never spoken. He cried. Jamie cried. Even I let a tear slip when I spoke of that cold night in the basement, hearing the upstairs floorboards creak with celebration, while I lay under a thin blanket beside rusted pipes and storage boxes labeled Ixmas Decor. Eric winced. I never knew. You never asked. In the weeks that followed, something resembling a relationship began to form. Not the same mother-son bond we once had, but something newer, warier. Built not on nostalgia but on confession. We walked together sometimes, Jamie often between us. He never stopped calling me Grandma, but one day when we passed the rose garden near the old church, he turned and said, I'm proud of you, you know, for standing up for yourself, for surviving us. Us. The word landed like both an apology and a truth. I smiled through the ache, and I'm proud of you. You never let cruelty settle in your bones. Months later, I received a letter from Charlotte. A real one. Handwritten. It was an apology exactly. It was an update. She had filed for divorce. She was moving in with her sister across town. And she had started attending evening classes in elder care, hoping to understand what she had ignored. I placed the letter in a drawer. I wasn't ready. But someday maybe. I look around now and see a life return to me, not as it once was, but with scars that glitter like sea glass. My garden blooms again. My brushes are dipped in color. Jamie still visits every weekend, sometimes bringing friends from college who call me Mrs. Evelyn and ask for my peach pie recipe. As for Eric, he comes by when invited, never empty-handed, never with expectations. The past doesn't vanish, but neither do the people we choose to become after it. So here we are, dear listener. I once slept in the basement while my son's children took my room, but I left without a word and found a voice they couldn't silence. Not with distance, not with shame, not with papers signed in haste. If this story held your breath the way it once held mine, I ask only this. So before you sit down and listen to another tale of betrayal and quiet revenge, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. You never know which whisper might echo your own.